What's up, guys? Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. If you guys want to support the channel, you guys can pick up some Into the AM shirts. They're super comfortable. You'll get 10% off when you use my code DeckTech. Additionally, you can become a patron. Not only is it the best way to support the channel, but additionally, you'll get more say in what deck techs I cover. Special shout out to my high contributing patrons. Newsome, you rock. Now, let's get into today's deck tech with loot. And honestly, I have 3 different ideas for this guy, and I think I'm going to build all 3. So let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. The first things that came to mind was Landfall, Storm, and Artifact Storm. The Artifact Storm list, we're going to reduce all the cost of our artifacts to cast them from the top of our library. The Landfall list, we have lands to play, so we're going to be able to play additional lands. That way, whenever we're exiling 4 to 5 cards off the top of our library, we're actually able to play those lands and play those cards because we've ramped a ton. And then the third one, again, that's the Storm list. We're going to play Stormkiln Artist, a lot of very low costed cantrips. That way we can play everything we exile. Because the only problem we have with this guy is how we're going to play all of the cards we're exiling off the top of our library, right? This guy can exile upwards to 3. I think 3 is going to be very consistent because all you need is an artifact, an enchantment, and then a creature, and boom, you're exiling 3 a turn on top of drawing a card. And then you can get to 4 or 5 in some scenarios, but like I said, 3 is going to be the constant. So if you're drawing 3 to 4 cards a turn consistently, how are you ever going to cast those spells? The first thing that came to mind and the deck that we are going to talk about today is Landfall. We're going to play a ton of creatures that let us play additional lands, so whenever we exile multiple lands, we'll be able to play them, and then we will be able to cast the spells because we have a ton of lands and we've ramped into an Oblivion. On top of that, exiling stuff and land synergies has kind of combined over the past years. We've gotten a lot of tech like Feldorn, Sword of Forge and Frontier, even the Lost and the Damned from the Warhammer set. All of them really synergize with exiling stuff from the top of our library and putting lands into play. We get to play Paco and Haldan as well, which you guys know those are kind of my pet commanders, so I'm excited to shove them in another deck. We have some top deck manipulation, that way we can ensure that we're exiling mostly lands because again, we don't want to have to exile or leave some of our creatures in exile, that way we can't cast them. But if that happens, it's not going to be the end of the world either. From there, we're playing some battles, Passionate Archaeologist. We even get to play the 12th Doctor. There's some really cool, unique cards we get to play with this commander. So if that sounds like a deck tech you want to get into, let's get into it. Let's kick it off by talking about some of the unique cards we're running for this commander. Paradox Haze. This will give us an additional upkeep, meaning that we get 2 triggers off of our commander. 9 times out of 10, that's going to allow us to impulse draw 6 to even 8 cards a turn. Tlenkali Hunter. Now this one's amazing. Not only is it kind of recursion in a way, but additionally we can take all of those massive things like Omnath that we're exiling off the top of our library and cast at least one of those for free once each turn. Feldorn and the Lost and the Damned are going to be perfect for this deck. Now, what I like about the Lost and the Damned is it's even going to trigger when we're playing lands out of our graveyard, which this deck can also do very effectively. And then Feldorn's just going to generate us a massive board state of those wolf creatures, along with having a solid loot effect we can trigger every turn. Delayed Fire Blast is going to be an amazing one-sided board wipe. Since we're casting this from exile 9 times out of 10, it's just going to deal 5 damage instead of 2. Extraordinary Journey. Not only can this kind of act as removal, but additionally it's going to be solid card advantage in a deck where we're casting most of our spells from exile anyway. The 12th Doctor is going to give the first spell we cast every turn from exile Demonstrate, which is going to be insane, essentially doubling up on that value. Now our opponents will get some of that value, but we'll get double value and we'll be able to abuse the value more efficiently. Doc Arlock is going to be amazing in this deck. Getting 2 cost reduction off everything we're casting from exile is pretty massive. Rose Cutthroat Rider. This is essentially going to be a mini Jessica's Will every turn. Does exactly what we want to do. Gives us a little bit extra mana and it gives us more cards to cast from the top of our library. On the low end, we can exile up to 3 cards off the top of our library every turn and get 3 junk tokens. So that's pretty solid, especially when we can even store those up for an even more explosive turn later. Scroll Rack and Sensei's Divining Top. I did want some top deck manipulation. That way we can get those expensive cards off the top of our library. Like if an Omnath's on top of our library, we definitely want to save that for the late game, so we'd rather put it in our hand instead of exiling it with our commander. Sylvan Library is amazing for the same reason. Even without the card draw, if we just look at the top 3 every single turn and arrange those top 3 into what we draw and what we exile, that's going to be a massive benefit with this commander. And then if we do decide we want to pay 8 life, we could potentially be looking at 8 to 6 cards a turn, which is kind of insane. Passionate Archaeologist is just going to start pinging our opponents whenever we're casting those spells from exile. Paco and Haldan, some of my favorite cards, and they're going to be perfect in this deck. They're going to essentially draw us 4 cards a turn off of everybody's deck. That's going to give us even more lands to play because we can play our opponent's lands using Paco and Haldan. Additionally, the value we get off of them is insane in general. Rising of the Day, I just wanted some form of haste in the deck, and additionally, it is an enchantment, so we can start working on getting multiple permanent types on the battlefield. Wild Growth does exactly the same thing. Terror of the Peaks is kind of more of a game ender in the deck. Whenever those lands are entering the battlefield and we're creating a board state, we're going to ping our opponents to death. Oko, Thief of Crowns, and Minskimbu. Now, most of these are in there just because they're additional planeswalkers, but additionally, these are some of the best planeswalkers in Temur. Let's not forget battles. We're running Invasion of Ikoria, Invasion of Urgamon, which Invasion of Urgamon probably just goes and finds us Invasion of Ikoria. Willbender, Stratus Dancer, and Glenalindra are going to be amazing in this deck as counterspells. Since counterspells are kind of trash in this deck, if we exile them, we can only use them on our turn, so it just seemed better to have these effects. Now, yes, your opponents will know that you went ahead and morphed down a counterspell, but that's still going to deter them from doing anything that they wanted to do to you anyway. Let's not forget to protect our commander with Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves. Jeska's Will kind of seemed like a no-brainer here. We also are running the Soul Ring and all of the Signets, and the reason we're running Signets is pretty simple. They come down early, they get us into our commander because they kind of fix our mana, and then additionally they get us an early artifact that sticks on the battlefield so we can start exiling cards with our commander's ability. Devastation Tide and Consuming Tide are some of the best board wipes in the deck just because we are on Ashaya. So with Ashaya on the battlefield, these are essentially going to be one-sided and save us from those board wipes. Now we can move on to the landfall portion of this deck. We have Exploration, Dryad of Illusion Grove, Azusa's Lost But Seeking, and AC Tyrant of Gyre. Now, these ones are going to be very useful to get all of those lands that we exile onto the battlefield. Additionally, AC is going to provide us a ton of card advantage. Undergrowth Recon's one I'm trying out. I really like the idea that it can play cards from our graveyard, or not play, but put land cards from our graveyard onto the battlefield without us having to actually play them. This will allow us to still make our land drops while ramping us. And remember, 9 times out of 10, you are going to reanimate a fetch land, and fetch lands can net you 2 landfall triggers a turn. Ashaya is going to be amazing in this deck. It's going to turn all of our creatures into lands, so they'll trigger our landfall effects, and then additionally, they do have the broken interaction with our one-sided board wipes. Summer Bloom's just going to throw 3 lands into play. Sometimes we will just rip 3 lands off the top, so we will want to be able to put all of those lands into play. Summer Bloom's going to be perfect for that. This can also ensure whenever we have Paco and Haldan lands that we can play 3 of our opponent's lands. Nissa Resurgent Animus, Tireless Provisioner, and Lotus Cobra are going to give us additional mana to spend on all of our cards whenever we're putting lands into play. Nissa's also going to be insanely useful in this deck, getting us all of our broken elemental cards, which we do have a lot of. World Soul's Rage, this is going to be a solid removal spell that can also double as a way to put more lands into play. Remember, we can put more fetch lands into play using this, and fetch lands will trigger all of our landfall abilities twice. Scapeshift does just win us the game in a lot of scenarios. It really depends on your board state, but honestly, Scapeshift probably one of the best cards in this deck and can be 4 mana win the game with a board state. Omnath, Locus of the Royal, this is going to be some solid card advantage. It's going to make our board state a little bigger, and it can be a solid way to deal some damage to a creature. Omnath, Locus of Rage, one of the more solid ways to win the game. There is a pseudo infinite combo in this deck that involves Risen Reef, but we will go over that later. Tatia Heptio of a Benthic Druid, more card advantage. Morag Fury of Okum. This with Scape Shift does just win you the game. Same with Omnath. If you have Omnath on the battlefield and you Scape Shift with the right board state, yeah, you can win the game there as well. Avenger of Zendikar, again, with the right board state and Scape Shift, this wins you the game on the spot. Titania, Protector of Argoth. This girl triggers a ton because we have a lot of fetch lands in this deck, and again, Scape Shift's looking pretty good here. Crucible of Worlds is absolutely insane in this deck. Just this and an Exploration will allow us to play upwards to 2 additional lands, but imagine if we have a fetch land in our graveyard. That's going to net us up to 4 landfall triggers a turn, and that can even get more insane if we have something like Azusa on the battlefield, upping it to 6 landfall triggers a turn. And we can even go beyond that if we have an Ancient Green Warden on the battlefield. So now, as long as we have a fetch land, this will double up on all of our landfall triggers, and if we have Azusa on the battlefield, we could be looking at 12 landfall triggers a turn. Virtue of Knowledge is also pretty solid in the deck for the same reason, just doubling up on all of our landfall triggers. Additionally, if we do happen to exile it, we can actually use its instant adventure, put it into exile again on that adventure, and cast it at a later date. So it's pretty flexible in this deck. Greensleeves is going to be a solid payoff for all of those lands entering the battlefield. We have Sword of Forge and Frontier. This is going to be another card that allows us to play more lands and gives us more impulse draw. And then we have Wayward Sawtooth, just for another way to put additional lands into play. Now, let's go over that near infinite combo. As long as we have Omnath, Locus of Rage on the battlefield, Virtue of Knowledge on the battlefield, and Risen Reef on the battlefield, all we have to do is make 1 land drop. From there, that's going to trigger Omnath twice due to Virtue of Knowledge, and then that's going to trigger Risen Reef 4 times due to, again, Virtue of Knowledge and 2 elementals entering the battlefield. Now, what makes this pseudo-infinite is that we do have to hit additional land drops off of the top of our library with Risen Reef. This does kind of become trivial at one point though, just because of the amount of fetch lands we're running in this deck. There is a slight chance we whiff, but that's not likely. And then the win from there is we get our haste enabler on the battlefield and attack with all those angry Omnaths for lethal. I hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech. Remember, I'm probably going to do 2 more of these. Don't forget to let me know down in the comments down below if that would be interesting to you. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Boosting the algorithm really helps me out, and I would like to thank my high contributing patrons. Newsome, Chicken Salad, Excessum, and Creator. I really appreciate you guys. With that being said, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.